In a small, forgotten village nestled between dusty hills and broken roads, there lived a man they all knew. He had no fancy title. He had no certificates. He couldn't even read a single word. To many, he was a fool, not because he was lazy, not because he was unkind, but because when you handed him a paper, he turned it upside down, pretending to understand it. He'd nod during meetings, smile through shame, and quietly ask a child later, "What did that paper say?" They laughed at him, called him empty upstairs, but they always came to him with their problems. Why? Because despite his illiteracy, he had something they couldn't ignore: wisdom, courage, and a heart that burned for the people. He was the loudest voice in a place where no one listened. And even though he couldn't read a single letter, his life would soon write a story the world would never forget. He was born into silence, not the peaceful kind, but the silence of poverty, where dreams are whispered and hunger shouts louder. As a child, he never held a toy. He held a hoe. While other boys wore uniforms, he walked barefoot through cassava fields, working to put food on the table. School was a luxury, one he couldn't afford. By age 10, he dropped out to farm full-time. He couldn't read. He couldn't write. Not even his own name. They laughed. At meetings, someone would say, "Let him sign." And when he couldn't, the crowd would erupt. He'd force a smile, but inside, he bled. Still, he never fought back. He greeted those who mocked him. He helped them fix broken roofs, fetch water, solve land disputes. He was poor in letters but rich in heart. And deep within, he held a quiet fire, a burning desire to change things, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. The village was broken long before he ever spoke of change. The roads were more like wounds, cracked, muddy, and impossible when it rained. Children walked miles barefoot just to attend a school with no desks, no books, and barely any teachers. Women fetched water from a stream shared with goats. The water smelled. It looked worse. Sickness came not from spirits, but from the cups they drank from. And yet, no one came. No politician visited. No aid ever reached them. To the outside world, the village didn't exist. He watched mothers lose babies to fever. He watched bright children stay home because they had no uniforms. His heart boiled, not for himself, but for his people. He was tired of watching them suffer, tired of empty promises and forgotten names. And even though he had no formal education, he began to wonder, what if I tried? What if I stood up? Even if I didn't know how to read? The child's cry had faded by morning. Another life lost, not to fate, but to neglect. No clinic, no nurse, not even painkillers. The old African man stood at the small grave, fists clenched, eyes burning. This wasn't the first, but something inside him broke. Or maybe finally woke up. That evening, the villagers gathered under the old tree expecting another complaint, another helpless speech. Instead, his voice rose steadier than ever. "I watched a child die today, again, and I asked myself, what if I tried? What if I stood up? I may not know how to read letters, but I can read your pain. I carry it. I live it. So yes, I'm running for counselor." The silence was sharp. He wasn't rich. He wasn't schooled. But in that moment, he was something greater. A man refusing to bow to failure. And for the first time, hope stood taller than fear. The whispers turned into laughter. "Ah, this one wants to be counselor?" A man scoffed. "He can't even read a signboard." Another chimed in. "What will he do in office? Count money with his fingers?" Even his own cousin chuckled bitterly. "Politics is for educated people. Don't disgrace us." He heard it all, every word, and it hurt, not because they were wrong about his illiteracy, but because they were blind to his heart. He stood before them one morning, voice calm but heavy. "If I can't read, I'll learn," he said, "but I will not be silent while we suffer. I have watched our children die. I have seen promises come and go like dry wind. You can laugh, but I'm not doing this for pride. I'm doing it because we deserve better." For a moment, no one spoke. The laughter faded. A seed of respect, tiny but real, began to take root. Under the cover of darkness, the old African man met with a young teacher. No one knew about their secret lessons. Not the villagers, not even his family. With a small oil lamp flickering, he traced letters in the dirt, slowly learning the ABCs. It was not easy. Some nights frustration welled up like a storm inside him. He wanted to give up. He was an old man after all, but he remembered the faces of the suffering children, the tired mothers, and pressed on. By day he practiced wherever he could, reading faded signs on shops, scanning newspapers left behind by travelers, even asking school children to help him sound out words. Each small victory lit a fire inside him. He was no longer just the man who couldn't read. He was becoming a man who refused to stay silent. The day came. The sun rose over the village like it had always done. But something was different. Posters were pinned on trees. Loudspeakers echoed names and promises. And among the names was his. People whispered, laughed, shook their heads. He can't even spell election. But others stood taller, prouder, pointing to him. He may not write speeches, but he speaks truth. On the day of the election, he stood outside the polling center with dusty feet and fire in his eyes. He shook hands, bowed humbly, and said only one thing. You know me. I've always been here. Votes poured in, not out of pity, but out of trust. The man who once begged children to read signs for him now had villagers putting X's beside his name. He didn't win just a seat. He won belief. A man with no degree, no grammar, had become a voice for the voiceless, and his journey had just begun. He stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly, paper shaking. But he read, slowly, clearly. Every word felt like a mountain climbed. The crowd listened, not for speed, but for strength. The old African man who once asked children to read signs for him now read speeches to hundreds. He became a symbol, not just of change, but of courage. Adults who once laughed at him began asking, "Can I learn too?" So he launched programs, night schools for adults, boreholes for clean water, books for children who once sat on bare floors. He wasn't just a counselor now, he was hope in human form. Villagers who once saw education as unreachable now walked into learning centers with heads high. Not because they were young, but because it was never too late. And through it all, he never forgot where he came from. Because icons aren't born in comfort, they're carved from struggle and lit by purpose. The old African man stood before a sea of scholars, leaders, and journalists at a national literacy summit. No teleprompters, no paper in hand, just his voice and a memory carved by struggle. He looked out at the crowd, some doubting, some curious, all silent. And then he spoke. I stand here today not because I know more than you, but because I refuse to accept less. The room leaned in. I once asked children to read for me. Now I teach elders to read for themselves. He smiled gently, letting the silence carry the weight of his journey. My people didn't need a perfect leader. They needed someone who felt their pain, someone who would not stop. And with a deep breath, he closed. I couldn't read words, but I read the tears of my people. That was enough to lead them. The applause didn't just honor him. It honored every soul who ever dared to rise, even when the world said they couldn't. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, allow notification, and also drop a beautiful comment if you found this video helpful.